Welcome to the HR Think Tank, our podcast that uncovers the power a trusted workforce has on team performance, culture, and morale. We gather insights from experts, business leaders, and HR professionals to help you lead your team more effectively. Here's your host, Kai No, CEO of Verify Now, a trusted provider of background screening services.
While accounting and financial planning may seem black and white to some, our guest today has discovered that it's not all about the numbers. She believes the human element plays a much bigger role than people give it credit for, specifically the human element of trust. Dr. Michelle Cull is the Associate Dean of Engagement at Western Sydney University and has worked for more than 15 years in ASX 100 listed companies. She is now a leading academic in financial planning, specialising in the moral development of financial advisors in Australia and the role of trust in the relationship between advisor and client. Welcome to the HR Think Tank, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here.
Really pleased to be here.
So first thing I want to ask is, can you tell us a little bit more about you, your role, and specifically what it means to you to have worked your way into a leadership position as Associate Dean of Engagement at Western Sydney University?
I think I always saw myself going into a leadership role when I was leaving high school. And I was very lucky to have a lot of opportunities in the workplace. I started out in an accounting cadetship, and as part of that role, I learned a lot of different areas of the business that I was in. And I was, I suppose, in a way being groomed to become a director of this top 100 company. But part of that experience involved a lot of projects where I had to work with people, and I got to know people on a personal level as well as a professional level, and how we could use their strengths to the best of their abilities and to help the company succeed. And in other positions that I held after that, I was always involved in some sort of project. So projects such as a profit sharing scheme that would give back to the employees. So not just the directors that would get bonuses and other sort of professional staff that had a bonus and reward system in place. But this was for those people who were, on the shop floor, working away, producing the products that we were selling and making those profits off. So I suppose I was always in some way doing some sort of leadership role. Okay. But in my current role, I think what I really like about it is that I can have that impact on students. So when I made that transition from industry to becoming an academic, that was something that meant a lot to me, because I could see that I was actually helping the next generation, and I was able to explain to students a little bit more than what they could get out of the textbook, because I had those experiences, and having students thinking more about the decisions that they would make in real life, rather than just saying there's this information in a textbook and, answer the question. Yeah.
So was that a gradual change for you, switching between industry and academia, or was that like a one night, where it sort of occurred to you? Like how did that whole process
It was
happen?
A gradual process. So when I was studying at university, if you had have said to me that I was going to be in this position, I wouldn't have believed you. It wasn't something that was on my radar at all. It was only that after I'd worked for a few years and I'd finished my degree, I remember saying to my husband at the time, I really like to see if I could get a casual position, just teaching at night at the university. I want to give back. I've had all these experiences, and I feel that there's more that I want students to learn other than what's written in a textbook. And just as I was saying it, I opened up the paper at that stage and they were advertising for a casual lecturer. So I applied, and it sort of started there. And then when I could see, like, just when students actually understood a concept because you were able to use examples, real life examples, and seeing them learn and being able to make that impact, it just meant a lot to me. Yeah. And I suppose in a way I always had that teaching element. Even when I reflect, when I was in industry, I was running training courses to help people get up to speed with new technology, or to understand how the budget worked, so that they could do what they could to maximise the profit for not just the company, but get their bonus or get their profit share.
So you had the natural inclination.
I think so. My mum always used to say, when I studied accounting, she always used to say, I still think that you're a teacher. And I actually received a teaching scholarship to be an high school economics teacher. I loved economics, but I had my accounting cadetship, and I'd already started that. And so I went with that.
Yep.
So that's sort of how it worked. And then I suppose eventually I was doing that casual teaching while I was working full time. I did have my children, so that sort of made me reflect on where I was spending my time. And I had a bit of travel involved with my other role. And I thought, maybe for a couple of years I could go full time at the university. And the university was sort of pushing that to say, hey, why don't you come on board full time? And so I did that, and as a temporary type of thing, and still there now.
It's a fascinating journey. So, Michelle, you're a leading academic in financial planning, and we've got you on board today to talk to us a little bit more about your research as well and your experience. How has the financial industry changed over the last 20 years? Can you set the scene for us?
Yes, so it has changed substantially. I think probably the last 20 years has seen the most significant changes. So the first significant change came in and around 2001 with the Financial Services Reform Act, and that was trying to lift the qualification standards of financial planners. And at that stage, I had started to teach financial planning. So it's a long time ago now, but we actually had a financial planning unit that was a compulsory unit in the accounting program. And at the time, though, it wasn't required that financial planners had to have a degree. And, of course, there were still commission payments being made and all of those sorts of things. And that's where I started researching, because I thought, okay, I knew financial planners as well. We were teaching financial planning. Financial planners can play a really important role in someone's life. And, of course, if you've got a good financial planner, that's fantastic. But if you haven't, then, we hear a lot in the media about some of the bad stories. But it's unfortunate the media have been focusing on the bad stories and not the good stories. And there's many more good stories than bad. But this is why I thought I need to do some more research in this space, because teaching financial planning, there wasn't much happening in the academic space. It hadn't sort of been recognised as a profession on its own. So over those years, there's been numerous changes made, different governments coming in and trying different things. But then, of course, once the GFC happened and a lot of people had lost a lot of money, there were some other I suppose, consultations made and a push from consumers to say, something needs to be done here so that people are not losing their life savings. And so the standards started to become, a little bit more rigorous, and the professional bodies, the main professional bodies such as the Financial Planning Association, for example, were beginning to say, look, if you want to be a member of our association, you actually need to have a bachelor's degree. So it wasn't legislated at that point. The Financial Services Reform Act earlier had required a certain level of qualification, but like it could have been an advanced diploma, for example, but it wasn't at that degree level. And, so part of those reforms that were coming in was first up to lift the education standards. And then there was talk about a code of ethics. And, of course, one of the things, and I think I may have written about this as well, was that unless you were a member of a professional body, you were not bound by a code of ethics. So you could be a financial planner, not be a member of a professional body, and then you had no code unless you had your own code of ethics.
Because what is the take-up rate to be part of the professional body?
Well, there were around 26,000 financial advisors prior to the latest regulations that have changed the landscape significantly, and that's almost halved now. So there's a huge demand for more people to enter financial planning. And financial planning traditionally as well had career changes. So you didn't often have people who would, be, leaving high school going, what careers will I look at? You might have the traditional, going to medicine or law or business, but not specifically financial planning. And then when you add to that the bad media coverage, could you imagine a child saying to their parents, I want to become a financial planner? If those parents have heard some bad things, they might not want to encourage it. Those who have got a financial planner, however, and my research found this, they, of course, had all of their trust in their financial planner and were great advocates for them. But the government is also trying to promote more consumers to seek professional advice. And I think also in Australia, when superannuation was introduced in the 90s, the onus was put onto the individual consumer to really consider their own planning for retirement, really. And a lot of people can't navigate that landscape. No, honestly, so you do need
financial
advice.
Literacy was not something that was taught in my house. growing up, so I had to learn that a lot, and I have professional advisors as well, thankfully, to help with that situation. So where would you say the industry is now? So you said that there used to be 26,000, there's probably less now, but the demand is still there for the services. So there's a shortful of professionals who can actually
cater. A huge shortfall, yes. Okay. And part of that is also because of the new mandatory requirements. So if I try to summarise them very briefly, the requirement is to have a minimum bachelor's degree, but it's not just for new entrants. Right. So even existing, so you imagine anyone out there who has their current qualifications in their current role, imagine being told all of a sudden you're no longer qualified for your role, and you've got, let's say, 2 years. I mean, it's been extended, but if you're told you've got 2 years to upgrade your qualifications, you're working full time, you may actually be owning your own practice, have a young family. Or have caring
really
responsibilities.
Good at what you do already.
Great, have a great reputation. You may have worked in the industry for 20 years and now you're being told you actually need to do more qualifications. So it wasn't received by everybody probably as well as hoped, but it also was something that there was need, like consumers were saying, like, this should be required. Yeah. And so bachelor's degree is a minimum, but it also means that those people who are already practicing could go in and do a postgraduate, like a graduate diploma. So a graduate diploma that is accredited meets those requirements too, but it's still extra study. So that's one thing, having those requirements. The next requirement was to have to sit a national ethics exam. Financial planners had until the end of this year. They've just had the last lot of exams now. So that became the priority. They everybody, whether they had already had an approved degree or not, every financial planner had to do a compulsory subject in ethics.
Wow.
Yes.
And how is that handled? Is that through like one particular institution, or is that a course that individual members can complete it?
No,
anyway?
So there are a number of...
Is it the same course? Sorry, I should be asking.
It meets the same learning outcomes, and it has to be approved by what was then called the Financial Advisor Standards and Ethics Authority. But all of these courses were approved. So universities had limited time. We were working very, very long hours at the university to try to develop courses in quick enough, because things are not always that quick in universities. There's levels of approval that have to go through, and you need people to teach it as well, right? So
but it's an important topic.
Oh, it is
for this area that has like a significant bearing on one's future outcome. So I think that's a really good thing. So you said some of this, a lot of this driving came from consumers. I want to ask you the follow-up question, which is, what is the importance of qualification checks when choosing a financial planner?
Right. Okay. So I might just give a bit of a backstory. When I was doing my PhD research, what I actually found from both clients of financial advisors and people who hadn't yet seen a financial advisor, what was common across them all was that they all said that they would not see a financial advisor who wasn't qualified. And I would ask them, well, what does that mean? And they would say that they'd have to have a degree, that they would be a member of a professional body, all of these sorts of things. So, of course, that was very important to consumers. This is part of trust that I know we're going to talk about as well. But so this is the competence sort of based trust. And, of course, that on its own wasn't going to be enough. But it was definitely something that they held in high regard. So in terms of the qualification itself, a lot of financial advisors would actually have them displayed so their clients could see. And you think if you're going to go and see a doctor, you would want them to be qualified as well. Like any professional that you would see, you would expect the sorts of things that are now required. You expect that they would have a university degree or some sort of high level qualification. You would expect they'd have some experience, that they'd have an authority that they would be accountable to if there was some sort of problem. So those sorts of things were very important there. Could you just maybe take me back to...
So no, I think you answered it, because we were talking about what's the importance of qualification checks when choosing a financial planner, and you're saying in your research people expect that as a minimum. So you don't walk in and go, hey, Bob, you're my financial planner, and he says, I got no qualifications and there's nothing on display. Because, in our space, we work in background screening. Right, so we work with a lot of employers who want to do pre-employment checks prior to hiring someone, and that it comes down to the question of, are you appropriately qualified? Are you suitably experienced? And do you have values alignment? In terms of Are you a person with integrity? Can I trust you to be in the role? Because a lot of our customers have people in roles of trust, high trust particularly. So for them, things like qualifications matter, right? But I guess the follow-up question is, how can consumers check that the qualifications of their financial planners are
what
legitimate?
they say they are.
Yeah,
That's
because,
right.
it's on display, but there's no other third party. It's just, a document on the wall. So
Yes.
what's the advice that you have to consumers for
Okay.
this?
I have some great advice here, so thank you for asking that question. So part of the reforms that were put in place were to have a national financial advisor register for this exact reason, so that consumers for free, they didn't have to go see anyone. They could just do a quick search on the internet and they could find an independent place that would actually state what the financial advisor qualifications were. So to be a financial advisor, it's actually enshrined in the Corporations Act. To call yourself a financial advisor or a financial planner, you must meet all of these legislative requirements. It is illegal to call yourself that unless you meet them. So that's something that's more recent.
Yeah.
And, of course, that then also means you have an authorised number that you would be able to act under, and you are on the financial advisor register. So to search the financial advisor register, you could just Google financial advisor register, but this is the thing, getting it out to consumers to say, hey, this is available, please check it. So what ASIC have done, they've got their Money Smart website,
Great website.
Fantastic. For financial literacy, the way it's designed, very easy to follow and understand for all ages. And so the Money Smart website actually refers people, if they are put in, a question about looking for a financial advisor, it will actually refer them to that register. And on that register, it will have who the financial advisor is working for, where they're located, whether they've had anything, any black marks against their name in the past, what they might have been, if they've passed the national ethics exam, if they've got, their relevant qualification requirements, and also any specialist sort of qualifications that they might have. If they're a member of a professional body, that will also be listed. So it's got a lot of information that can be very useful.
Yeah, and so that certainly builds the trust portfolio or credentials, I guess, for an individual consumer who goes, okay, I've got a third party, it's a government website, so I can trust this, and they can go in rather than second guessing.
So like a government website. So you've just said that we've made an assumption there, haven't we?
Yeah.
And when we're talking about trust, we've made an assumption that you can trust that information, right? And that information is provided by the licensees, the financial advising licensees, and of course there's the checks and balances that would take place there too. However, I did recently deliver some financial confidence sessions to some different groups, and I had a question at the end from a lady who was asking, well, can I believe what the government's telling me? Why would they want this good stuff to happen to me type thing? Why, and I was referring them to the Money Smart side as well, but and also some other things, and it sort of made me sort of step back a little bit. We can't just assume. People from different types of backgrounds treat different information differently. So some people don't trust what the government says, and which can be a bit alarming, I think. But we know there has been a lot of distrust around with a lot of things that have happened
that's a
in
whole
the
nother
world.
conversation. And then, if there are registers where it's self-reported, and then you're thinking, okay, well, what's the veracity of this information? Like, has it been checked to actually say this person's got it? It's, there's so many platforms where you can post things yourself, and I don't know if we'll put this part of the podcast, but people know that I work in background screening, and we run a digital platform. I've had people reach out to me and say, "Hey, Kai, my friend's been catfished. Like, what can you do about this to help this dating platform?" And I'm like, nothing yet, but we'd love to work out a little bit more, because again, those sorts of platforms, it's, you're putting up that information yourself, but there is no third party checking that.
That's right.
You're just believing it for what it is. And I think that brings us nicely into the next topic, which is around, you've done your research on trust in the financial planning, and specifically you identified a range of key characteristics that is essential to building trust, and I think it's applicable outside of financial planning as well. And that's where I really want to talk about, because Like, how can we apply the learnings that you found around trust in the context of the workplace, such as when you're hiring staff or when you're working with people or trying to build trust with new clients or stakeholders? Tell us, what did you find in your research around trust?
Okay, so in my research, I did look at different types of disciplines and how trust applied there. And I did find that there definitely were some commonalities. But I focused specifically on the client-advisor relationship. But as you said, I think that a lot of those findings could relate to other relationships as well. And I think, first up, one thing I did find going right back to sort of the original literature was, and there are arguments around this and not everyone agrees, but that trust has actually got two dimensions to it. It's got an affective dimension, so the feeling dimension, and it's got the cognitive dimension or the thinking dimension. And there's a lot of argument about what comes first. Is it the affective trust or is it the cognitive trust? And my response to that is, well, it depends. And I think it sometimes depends on the individual. But what's really important to know is that both dimensions are important to trust generally. So when we're looking at cognitive trust, for example, that's the sort of trust we've been discussing where, okay, you know that they've done the right degree, they've got the qualifications, you know that there's an authority that's actually checking that information as well. So you think this is the thinking part, you're thinking about it all. You might be looking at some other customer recommendations that have been made, for example. So this is all part of the cognitive side. When we talk about the affective side, it's much harder to define. And when I had been reading through all of this literature that had previously been written on it, I did struggle a little bit myself with it, but I had taken some examples and built it into the instruments that I was using. I had some surveys and some interviews that I did with both advisors and clients and general consumers who were not yet clients. And it was when I did my thematic analysis, the number of times when I was asking about trust and how someone knew that they trusted someone. Yes, we had those cognitive things, but then you'd often get, but all those things were important, but at the end of the day, it was just the feeling I had. I just felt I could trust them. So I was really trying to pull that apart, what gave them that feeling. And that is a large component of trust for a lot of people, and you often hear people say, trust your gut instinct, for example. And that's where that sort of comes from, I think.
Because it is a fascinating area. Like, this is where I want to spend a lot of time talking about this because, at Verify Now, our whole mission is to help organizations build a trusted workforce. So, we're really digging in deep to establish what it means, what trust actually means and how people cultivate that. We're always asking our guests, what are your tips around building trust? And you've broken it down very clearly into the affective and the cognitive, right? When we're talking about recruitment, interviewing, there's a lot that body language gives out. And I was reading your research, and I just love the first pages in terms of all the literature review and all the different definitions of trust or the framework of trust that comes down to that. I want to read a quote to you, one of the definitions, because I really like this one. This is from your literature review. It was written in 1967, but then there was another credit from 1980. This is what trust was defined as: a generalized expectancy held by an individual that the word, promise, oral or written statement of another individual or group can be relied on, right? So that was, going 40 years, 50 years ago. How has this changed in today's competitive landscape? Like that definition, does it still apply today? Oh,
it does. I think even more so. And reliability is key to this. And I think reliability speaks to both the cognitive and the affective dimensions, because if you can rely on someone because of their qualifications, let's say, or you rely on them because of their behaviour that give you that feeling. And this is what we can probably talk about a bit more. But if I just say how things have maybe changed and how they're also the same. When you were reading that definition, you said written or oral. And I think in this day and age, now with the internet and now with, your podcasts, all of the social media that we have, I think it's even more important because there's so many studies now that are looking into how people trust technology, for example. And some people just accept that their information is safe.
Yep.
Some people don't. Okay, so pulling all that apart and what makes people trust that their information is safe when they put something online. You mentioned a dating app, for example. All of these different things involve trust at some level. And I suppose putting those different security measures in place can help when you're working online. You've got something that's written, but it also can be very dangerous because something's written. Once upon a time, the written word had so much more value than I think it does now, because it had to go through such a lengthy process to actually become published. And it's funny actually, because I was just cleaning up my office the other day and I found a typewriter, a very old typewriter that used to be used by one of our relatives, and I wanted to check if it was still working. I put in some paper. I started to type a sentence. And I realised how much more effort went into this.
And if you made a mistake.
And if I made a mistake, that's right.
Whereas
and so things have just changed. Things can be edited online.
Well, so, I think if we look at recent trends as well, you talked a little bit about the trust in government. And when we talk about, fake news, untruths, like manipulated news, that plants seeds of doubt in everyone's mind. And when we're talking to our customers as well, generally everyone is trusting. I think Australia as a society has high trust.
Yes.
Right? And so when you're running these interviews, like, you don't want to be in a room where the employer is thinking this person's lying to me, right? And I think that's where the cognitive comes in. You do the pre-screening, you look at their CV, you look at their LinkedIn profiles, you look at the work that they've done, and that gives you a certain sense of trust. And then when you interview the person and actually meet them, that's where the other side comes in, the feeling.
Yes.
Right? That's right. What you're saying.
So you're saying cognitive trust comes first in this instance.
Right? Because you don't get to meet the people. You're looking at their profiles and their CVs, and you're making a judgment on whether or not you shortlist them. And then when you meet them, it's either they affirm what you've already believed, or it's contrary to what you thought. And that gap is where you're feeling uneasy. And I think when those don't align, that's when people don't go ahead with that decision
and that's that
or that hire. Because that's the effective part.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think, for our customers specifically, it's around creating that warming environment, because the person could be a trustworthy person, but the signals could be read wrong, or they're emitting the wrong things. And so then you're reading the wrong things.
That's right.
Right.
And I think that sometimes effective trust can be dangerous.
Yeah.
Because you might have someone with a lot of charisma. So if you looked at meeting someone for the first time before they did all those other background checks, so in this case, maybe the effective trust comes first.
Yes.
And they're, I really like that person. Could just be what they were wearing, a couple of things that they said that resonated with them. And then sometimes that causes people to trust them. All right, it could be the great sort of salesman, typical old fashion salesman. And even though we say that we don't trust salesmen, there's certain qualities that some people will have that effective trust with. So that's where it can be dangerous, because they might not actually have the authority or that competence.
And I guess that's why people end up using services like background screening, is to then verify all those credentials and claims. And on the cognitive side, you're getting that confirmation, and you have that confidence to then go ahead. So I think, that's why I was really fascinated to read all those different definitions. There were certainly common themes across it, and I'd love to use some of that work to create some content on our side, because I just thought it was fascinating. Like, you really did a deep dive on trust, and that's our space. One thing that I did pull out was one of the figures from your research was around the 7 characteristics of trust in personal financial planning. So I'll just read it out to you, and then please, if you've got any comments you want to make on that. So I'll just start from the top. You got vulnerability/risk. You've got faith. You've got competence, best interests, honesty, accountability, and feeling.
Yes, so I think we've discussed the feeling, and a lot of the feeling can also come from some of the other characteristics, but I might just add a few things to that if you like. So as you were saying about once you meet the person, you were talking about body language. So that's part of that. When I was delving a bit deeper as to, why do you think you felt like you're trying to really get more out of these clients? And they would say things like that they were interested, they were genuinely interested in them as a person. what else might they have said? That maybe they had something in common, right? So in some cases it was they also had young children their age.
Yeah.
So sometimes that was it. But with others, like I had an elderly person who had an elderly woman with a very young male financial advisor. And so her reasons were very different because she felt that he would be up to date with all the latest legislation and that sort of thing. So, and she found him extremely trustworthy. So it's not always having things in common, but it did come up quite a lot. The other thing was frequency of contact.
Okay.
So if clients felt that their advisor were available for them, so some of them said, look, I can ring them at any time if I've got any sort of question and they'll help me. Yeah. And, things like having regular meetings or regular phone calls, just little emails that the advisor or the professional, if it could be a HR professional. I suppose if you look at the recruitment process, you've got your clients and you've got the candidates. Yeah. So if a client changes something with the job description or something else changes, being in contact then with the candidates to say, hey, look, there's been these changes, that would build trust with the candidates.
I think that just speaks to reliability, which you said was key. For us, the biggest red flags is when the candidate just goes walkabout. Like you have zero contact, leading to it, they were reliable contact. And, my first point of is, has something happened to them?
Yes.
Like I'm always benefit of the doubt first, right? But then a week, 2 weeks, and you're like, nothing, they've ghosted you. All right, something else has happened and they haven't had the courage to tell you the truth. And that puts a marker on that person because they're not the qualities that you're looking for, right, in a person. One thing I do want to touch on, because we talked about these 7 characteristics, and I think as a consumer or as a hiring manager, depends on what your previous experience has been like.
It does.
Your trauma. You could be the type of person that is generally distrusting. Right. And so even if the other party puts all these trusting signals, you're still doubting it, right? Whereas there are other individuals who are high trust automatically. The first thing is, I always trust you first, and unless you're doing things that deduct that level of trust, I'm always going to trust you.
And most people fall into that category.
Whereas others start at the bottom and say, I don't trust you. You've got to give me signals, examples, outcomes that will then build up that trust. So in your space, in financial planning, does it often sit more in the other place first, which is they've got the credentials, they've got the qualifications, they're a member. Okay, the consumer will have high trust in this person already.
I think it was very much more like that previously, but I really feel that the media has made people more skeptical when it comes to seeking financial advice. So I think it's taking some people longer. Yeah. What I did find when I was doing my PhD, that was right smack bang in the middle of the GFC, and I thought, oh no, because I'd already collected my data. Yeah. And I thought, what's happening now? And then I thought, well, just like with science, right? The best time to study something is when it's changing. Yeah. So I'm like, right. And so I repeated what I had already done. And I thought, I wonder what will happen. I was expecting that clients would be less trusting because, the share market fell and people, didn't have, their investments weren't worth as much. And it actually had the opposite effect.
Really?
So those people who already had a financial advisor, they said to me it made them trust them more. And when I would say why, that's because they kept in contact with me. They told me, don't worry about it. It'll bounce back. Everything's fine. We've got it under control. Or if they've had to change a few of their strategies, they've told them what they need to do. And they felt like they were taken care of. They felt like the professional person knew what they were doing and had their best interests at heart, which was one of those other characteristics. Yeah. But when I spoke to people who had not yet seen a financial advisor, how the GFC impacted them, it actually had the opposite effect. Yeah. So they were like, oh no, all these people lost their money. Yeah. I wouldn't trust them. Yeah. So it would take a lot longer to build that trust up with those people. And I think that's why we need to hear more of the good stories. Yeah. There are just so many good stories.
That's fascinating. And I think, how you come into a room or a situation has a lot of bearing on how it's going to turn out. Like you don't want to be naive.
That's right.
You want to have a healthy level of skepticism, but you certainly want to be trusting, because in a business environment where you're negotiating new deals and you just come at it where you don't trust the person at all. And, in certain cultures or markets, it's not all cognitive. it is effective. It's a lot of that relationship building. It's the people side. It's the familiarity. It's the commonality. It's the shared interest or shared contacts. Those are the things that build up the trust first.
Yes.
Because if you believe in someone, they're always going to come through.
That's right.
And then if they demonstrate that they can, deliver time and time again, even during tough circumstances, you can do that. I mean, I'm a big believer in building long-term relationships as well. And for me, trust is critical. I want to work with someone who has that integrity and I can believe their word. Like, I don't like working with people where you're doubting their words because I think that is not a good point. That is not a good relationship.
Yeah,
point.
no, I agree.
So,
and reliability was in that definition, and that it really is the key, being reliable. So if you say you're going to do something and then you do it, that keeps building the trust. Yeah. And if you don't follow up on things, you say you're going to call someone back at a certain time and you don't do it, they'll start to doubt you. And if that happens a couple of times, then you might not get that trust back.
True. And some people are much tougher than others. They're not as lenient. So, Michelle, by the way, congratulations on your Educator of the Year award last year. I did see that on LinkedIn as well. And I thought we could talk a little bit more about your experience and to get some of your insights in the education industry. There's a push in some sectors towards a more vocational model of higher education. Certainly, the pandemic over the last few years has shifted people's thinking and saying, well, what is relevant? What is going to help us out for the future? I don't know if you think this is warranted or not, but I'd love to get your insights on that particular view. And what do you think is at risk if universities change their traditional models? Or maybe a better way to say it is, what is the value in the current way of delivering education?
All right. So if we go back to when COVID first hit, let's say, because this is where education has really started to change.
Yeah.
Of course, we couldn't have our traditional face-to-face classes. So many universities already had some online sort of courses, but many of those online courses were just people self-directed learning, like not actually, like now we've got Zoom and that sort of thing. Although I must say, in the online financial planning courses that I was teaching, I always was using video conferencing as soon as Skype was available. But a lot of the traditional online learning didn't happen that way. And then, of course, we had to find a new way of delivering the material to students, and we weren't able to be in those classrooms. So we were very lucky at Western Sydney University in our School of Business. We had already adapted what we call a flipped model. So we had already done away with having face-to-face lectures, and we have what's called lecture pods. So they're pre-recorded sort of lecture pods broken up into bite-sized pieces. And this was all based on feedback from students so that they could absorb it. Often a lot of international students found it harder to follow in lectures and trying to write notes and listen to what was being presented. So the lecture pods being recorded, great for learning because people could backtrack and have it repeated to them and make sure that they understood the concepts. But in terms of the workshop side of things and the tutorials, we did have to do something different, and as did all educational institutions. And we even saw the schools themselves, like high schools and primary schools, resort to doing all of this online. And Zoom, of course, everyone knows what Zoom is now, whereas not everybody knew before. And that has shifted things because people were able to learn anywhere. They could be in their own home and be learning. And it actually meant when we would I was involved with some international conferences. We weren't able to travel. They were online. So in some ways it actually opened the education up to more people. And also it meant that we were able to meet more people more readily from all around the world, because we could have them all online at the one time. We didn't have to, book accommodation and flights and things like that, and it didn't cost as much money. So we have more people register for a lot of these events because it was more accessible. So people want to see that continue in some ways, but it also has had some negative effects in that. I could talk about this for so long, but I know we don't have very long. For example, with students in a face-to-face class, you might often have those students that have those other questions they want to ask, but they're too afraid to ask in front of everybody else. They might have a welfare issue. And when you're in that classroom, you can pick up on things a lot more. You can check in on the students. in a conference, for example. It's all that networking that happens around, grabbing a coffee for morning tea, and then you're exchanging business cards. You're finding out a little bit more about the personal side of these people who you're meeting. So that didn't happen when we were online. So I don't think that was...
because I think that connection piece, even between the students and the students with the faculty, like that would have been a challenge during that time. And so, certainly I see that as one of the benefits of in-person education at whatever level, but we're specifically talking about the tertiary level. I think that would be one of the things that are missing. And you also, through those sideline conversations and you're getting to know people, you're meeting people from a wider array of backgrounds.
Oh, yes. It's all that networking that takes place, which you wouldn't have called networking before. We just took it for granted.
Yes.
But when you experience it differently, you realise the value of being in person. But I think there's benefits of both. But I think also now post-COVID, everything's very demanding. People are working very long hours, and they want to be able to still maintain their education or improve their education because they want to go for that next job or what have you. Yeah. But they don't always have the time. So what's started to change, and with the advent of technology and using things like Zoom, are a lot of short bite-sized courses, and micro-credentials is a big thing that's happening in education at the moment. So people still want to be recognised. They still want, it used to be the traditional certificate. Now you can get your little badge and you can put it on LinkedIn and say, yes, I've got this extra.
Do you see that challenging the traditional university mode of delivery?
I think it can challenge the mode. I know some universities are also delivering micro-credentials themselves, and there's a lot still to come. I know there's plenty of discussions happening, and there's a national paper on having a framework, which I think is very good that the government have sort of looked at this for recognising micro-credentials and how they fit into the TEXA sort of,
My wife's
system.
doing one right now, because she didn't want to commit to a 2-year degree.
That's right.
She's just looking for that, like bite-size sort of like, do I like this, build up, do I like this, build up, instead of committing and then regretting.
That's right. I think it's very useful for that. I think it definitely has a place, and I think that's fantastic. But I think for universities, it's still a very different experience, and I think it should always be like that, because universities are not just about upskilling people for the next job. They're about much more than that. It's about, meeting other people, building a social capital. You might meet people from different countries now that the borders are open again, but also different areas of Sydney. Even if you come to Western Sydney University, Western Sydney is such a broad area, and you're meeting people of all types of different backgrounds, and that's the value. That's what universities are about, like the uni and university. It's getting to meet all of those sorts of people and have those discussions and debates and grow as a human. And, I suppose we're building those social citizens. It's not just, putting them through like an education factory and spitting them out the other end so they can go and get a job. It's much, much more than that. And I think universities really need to hold on to that as their point of difference.
Yeah, well, for me, look, I'll just summarise it. The main things that I got from university, besides the degree, besides actually meeting my wife, I actually met my wife at university, it was learning how to learn. And I think that's been critical to my life post-university. I'm a lifelong learner. I've always wanted, but I never knew how to learn properly, to be honest with you. We won't go too much into my high school, but that was one thing. The network, the amount of different people that I met. And then lastly was the wider exposure to different subject areas.
Yes.
Not only the extracurricular stuff, but also the electives and core subjects, and talking about just things that I'd never really considered or talked to my family about. So I think that exposure was really important. So I'm a big fan. I want to now talk about something a bit more personal. And I know that you're an avid hockey player and coach. And the reason why I want to talk about this is some of our previous guests, we talked about graduates and the importance of identity and personal brand, and how young people coming out, first jobs, they make their job their identity. And whereas we're saying, no, who you are, your values, that's who you are. The job is just one part of it. So I want to talk about your hockey experience and what that influence has been in terms of identity, community, you talked about social capital earlier, and then overall well-being.
Yes, well, the well-being, of course, hot topic still at the moment. For me, that's a crucial part of what I do, because I pour my heart and soul into my work. I love my work.
Yeah.
And, it's very rewarding, but sometimes it is very hard as well. And I think everybody needs a bit of balance in their life. You need your mental, spiritual, emotional, physical. And for me, it's a great release to be able to go and do something completely different to what I do at work. And while I'm on that hockey field, I don't think about work. Yeah. And it just takes me away and it refreshes me. It recharges my battery so I can keep doing what I'm doing. And, and it's just, you've got the social, it's not just physical, you've got that social side. You meet so many people, the people you're playing against, the people you're playing with, other members of your club you go and support, they have social activities and things like that. And it's just fantastic. And you get, just like at university, you're learning about different people and different ways of thinking. You meet different people at, in sport than who you might meet when you're at work, for example. And once again, different backgrounds, different ideas about life, and you can learn from that. But I think also you can put a lot of what you learn in playing in a team into practice at work and vice versa. And some people don't like those analogies, and sometimes it is a bit hard if you've got people who haven't played sport for them to understand, if you're using those sports analogies. But it can really help, I
think so. You and I have spoken about the sport part, but the other important part to note is, everything that's happened in the last few years, there has been an increased rate of loneliness. Yeah. And so doing something like sport or a community activity that gets you out there can combat some of that, right?
Definitely.
And I think we need those other outlets in our life. Like we don't, my personal view is, life is not just about working. Yes, work's a big part of my life, but it's not all I am.
Yes.
It's one part of who I am. So that's why I wanted to raise this, because as adults, the social side does get more challenging. It's not as easy as when you're in school going 5 days a week, or you're going to university where it sort of just happens. The conscious effort is significant.
Yes.
Or maybe a better way to say it is there is more effort required to get those social outlets. And that's why I wanted to talk about this, because, if you're just in your own little bubble and you're just working all the time, I don't think it's healthy.
I don't think so either. And I think especially with working from home, which is great for work-life balance, but that's why you work from home, so you've got that work-life balance. Yeah. So one of the advantages is, if you've got a day that you're working from home, you might be able to actually get to training. Yeah. So you can commit to playing for a team. It actually has those advantages. But when I committed to playing, and I'm very much, even with my children, if you commit to doing any sort of activity, you see it out. But one thing that I was not expecting was that social, that all of the social benefits that came from playing sport. And
Michelle,
it's been so good.
I have to say, one thing I admire about you in our past conversations is your desire to learn new things and willingness to put yourself out there to learn new skills. And I think that says a lot about you, because when you're, as a professional, if you're fearful of learning new skills, you're not going to grow.
Oh.
And the fact that you've done this with multiple sports as well, put yourself out there. We were just talking about it earlier, with soccer and with hockey specifically, and people make these assumptions that you may have played it all your life, but no, you've come in as an adult and you're like, okay, I'm going to learn to do this. And I really admire that.
Yeah, I think it also, I remember when I first started learning how to play hockey, because I didn't realise there were so many rules, but no offside, so that helped a lot. When I played soccer, I had to make sure I understood that. But I was actually teaching first-year accounting at that time, and I had built into my classes about how to learn. So something that you actually just mentioned before. And it was really helpful for me because I was actually learning a new skill, so I was able to really break it down. Sometimes you can forget what the actual process that's involved. And even though we had all the theory, it was great to have that practical example as well, and have students go through an example themselves to think of something. It didn't have to be university or anything related to university. It could have been a hobby, playing a musical instrument, what made them get good at something. And, it's all about that commitment, the practice.
But it's also humbling, as we get further in our lives and careers, Sometimes there could be a level of complacency, of arrogance maybe. And when you're learning a new skill, that sort of just brings you back down to earth. And, you're a bit more empathetic with your younger staff, your newer staff who are at that learning phase. And I think that just gives you that level of patience and insight that you may have forgotten about if you're in your own bubble and you don't do these things. That's why I'm a big fan of learning new skills and doing new things. And right now, with having a toddler, sort of I'm seeing the world through his eyes, and it's sort of dialing it back and not assuming everything and thinking you know everything. I love that, and that's one thing that I really admire about you. So Michelle, thank you so much for the chat so far. It's been brilliant. We're going to now move to the Fast Five. This is the section where we ask you 5 quick questions, and it's an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay. All right. Let's see how we go.
You ready for this?
All right. I'm ready.
Okay. What was your first job and why did you get it?
My first job was at Big W as a checkout operator. I had a friend in my street whose mum worked there, and she was about to go in for a job interview and came across and said, "Hey, look, my mum's taking me over for this job interview. Would you like to come?" And I'd been just talking to my own mum about wanting to get a job and earn my own money, and because I'd just come of working age. And so off I went along to this interview. So I was very lucky I didn't have to put in a big application or anything, but the first interview ever. So, and I'm not really prepared for it. And we had to do some maths and
really?
Other testing with codes, because back then you didn't have a barcode. You had to enter key codes in. And so it was, checking how fast you were with all of that. So I loved the checkout. Obviously, that's why they put me on the checkout. It must have been from the little test that I did, a few questions that we were asked. I absolutely loved that job. And I remember trying to, get to the next level to work on the handy way. I think it was lane 6 or 7. They introduced FPOS at that time. So we used to have the old, bank card, carbon copy things, and they introduced this FPOS machine, and I wanted to learn that. And it was.
And now we take that for granted. We just tap everything.
It was so good
nice
though, and I wasn't a very confident person, and I think it built my confidence because I had to deal with the customers, and really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was great.
What's something interesting that's not on your CV?
Maybe. I mean, I do have, I think, my hockey on my CV. I don't know. I really like listening to some music that you might not expect. I like some heavy metal music. I really like, I'm listening to all sorts of music. So Post Malone at the moment is one of my, I've got a couple of the Post Malone albums which I like to listen to.
What have you learned about leadership and working on a team that you would want to teach your younger self?
Confidence, I think. Having confidence in yourself. I think that's a big thing. Even when learning new skills, I think that taught me a lot about confidence itself. That I think, even when we were talking about trust and competence, if you're competent, you tend to have that confidence. But when you're learning something new, you can doubt yourself sometimes. I think you've got to back yourself. And I think, and if you want to achieve something, you can do it. Yeah.
Can you provide a highlight from working in a trusted team?
Yes, I can. When I was away with COVID, when I contracted COVID earlier this year, I had other members of my executive team. There was something that needed to be delivered that week, and I didn't have to ask them. They stepped up and they did that. And I even feel a bit emotional now. It wasn't a huge thing, but it felt huge to just know, hey, I'm really supported here.
What would you like your legacy to be?
I've helped somebody build their confidence and maybe achieve something that they thought they couldn't.
Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the HR Think Tank today. It's been a wonderful chat about trust, about education, about how important it is to have other hobbies and activities outside of your work as well. I've learned a lot, and I hope we can maintain this connection, because I think that trust bit of research that you've done is integral to what we're going to be doing in the future as well.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed being here, and I hope we can work together and use that work that I've done. If you can put it to good use, that's great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Today's guest was Dr. Michelle Cull, the Associate Dean of Engagement at Western Sydney University, which in 2021 was ranked in the top 300 universities in the world in the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. We got insights from Michelle on the importance of trust and ethics in financial planning and across all business relationships, the value of higher education and the benefits of social connection and wellbeing. You can follow Western Sydney University and Michelle via their LinkedIn pages, and we've shared these details in our show notes.
Thanks for listening to the HR Think Tank with Kai No. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share our podcast with your network. Check out the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode or visit the Verify Now website for more information.